Number 8, David Clendon.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, David Clendon.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to table the exploration permit issued to Petrobras, which clearly states that the company is obliged to drill rather than consented to drill within a 60-month period of commencement.
Leave is sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is no objection. David Clendon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question to the Minister of Energy and Resources asks, what environmental protection provisions, if any, did the government include in the permit granted to Petrobras to explore for oil and drill off the east coast?
The Honourable Heke Parata.
Mr Speaker, Petrobras, like all operators, must comply with applicable law and regulations in New Zealand for the activities it conducts, including the Crown Minerals Act, the Resource Management Act, the Maritime Transport Act, the Biosecurity Act, and the Health and Safety in Employment Act. Petrobras has also committed to complying with the Department of Conservation's guidelines for minimising acoustic disturbance to marine mammals from seismic survey operations and has an independent observer on its survey vessel to ensure that is happening.
David Clendon.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker. Can the Minister confirm that outside the 12 nautical mile limit, the Resource Management Act does not apply and that there is no requirement for resource consent or any equivalent environmental approval?
The Honourable Heke Parata.
Mr Speaker, in New Zealand's EEZ and ECS, beyond the territorial sea, the Maritime Transport Act 1994, administered by Maritime New Zealand, applies when operating a ship or installation for seismic survey, drilling and production associated activities. Under the MTA Safety and Marine Protection Standards, known as Maritime Rules, Marine Protection Rules and Emergency Maritime and Emergency Marine Protection Rules apply, and operators must have maritime and marine protection documents. This is an issue which my colleague, the Environment Minister Dr Smith, has been actively working on as part of the EPA reforms.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, David Clendon.
Mr Speaker, that was a very fulsome answer, but it did not go to the heart of my question, which was asking about resource consent or equivalent environmental approval. The Minister referred to safety, to other issues, but not environmental approval.
Well, the dilemma I have as Speaker is that if the question asked specifically about resource consent processes, it would have been much simpler, but we went on to ask about or equivalent measures. And the Minister in her answer appeared to me to be giving equivalent measures relating to other pieces of legislation that did have environmental protection implications. And now I can't judge how comprehensive they are, but the member has further supplementaries to pursue that issue. David Clendon.
Supplementaries.
David Clendon, supplementary question.
To the Minister, why has a foreign oil company been permitted to explore and drill for oil in deep water when, according to the Ministry of Economic Development's review of offshore petroleum operations, there is, quote, a lack of environmental permitting regime, unquote?
The Honourable Heke Parata.
Mr Speaker, as I've previously answered, we have sufficient legislative and regulatory regime in place to cover the permit that is currently being made available to Petrobras, and we are addressing other wider EEZ legislation as part of our work agenda.
Supplementary.
The Honourable Rodney Hyde.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, why does the government stand by and allow these eco-terrorists to humiliate New Zealand and cost us potential jobs and income?
The Honourable Heke Parata.
Mr Speaker, police are responsible for operational decisions, and they take those decisions independent of ministers.
Supplementary.
David Clendon.
Mr Speaker, given that there is no environmental permitting regime or requirements in the permit issued to Petrobras, how can the government be sure that there will not be a catastrophic leak such as the one that occurred in the Gulf of Mexico last year?
The Honourable Heke Parata.
Mr Speaker, I reject the premise of that question. In previous answers, I've indicated the regulatory and legal regime that is in place to provide for environmental management.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Rodney Hyde.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, what action is the government taking to enable people to go about their lawful legal business in New Zealand waters, free from the harassment of eco-fascists who want to put New Zealand back into the dark ages?
Order. I don't think it's appropriate to refer to any New Zealanders as fascists unless they wish to be so referred to themselves. But more than that, I don't see how this question is the responsibility of the Minister. It relates to law and order, and this question is down to the Acting Minister of Energy and Resources. And I don't want to deprive the member of a question. I'd invite him perhaps to rephrase his question, try and bring it into line with the Minister's responsibilities. Yeah. The Honourable Rodney Hyde.
Okay, thank you, Mr Speaker. What action is the government taking to enable people to go about their lawful business that she, as Minister, has consented them to do, free from the harassment of what could you possibly call them, Mr Speaker? These eco-protesters who want to put New Zealand back into the dark ages.
The Honourable Hekia Parata.
Mr Speaker, as the Prime Minister has said, and I have repeated, protesters have the right to peacefully protest, but Petrobras has the permit to go about its survey business, and the rule of law will be upheld by police making operational decisions that are outside my portfolio.
David Clendon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister think that one part-time inspector will be sufficient to adequately monitor all offshore petroleum activities in New Zealand?
The Honourable Hekia Parata.
Mr Speaker, as I've already indicated, there is a comprehensive regime in place that involves hundreds, if not thousands, public servants who carry out their responsibilities under that Act, and we are also reviewing areas that we need to strengthen them.
Supplementary
question, David Clendon.
Mr Speaker, to the Minister, why has a foreign oil company been permitted to explore and drill for oil in our sensitive marine environment with no prior consultation with directly affected iwi and hapu?
The Honourable Hekia Parata.
Mr Speaker, that is simply untrue. Both Te Runanga o Ngāti Porou and Te Runanga o Te Whānau o Apanui were invited on several occasions to contribute to the permitting process.
David Clendon, supplementary.
Mr Speaker. To the Minister, what is the government's contingency plan if there is a catastrophic oil spill or leak resulting from exploratory drilling?
The Honourable Hekia Parata.
Mr Speaker, Maritime New Zealand is responsible for ensuring New Zealand is prepared for and able to respond to marine oil spills. The Marine Pollution Response Service consists of internationally respected experts who manage and train a team of around 400 local government and MNZ responders. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary.
I believe the member's had his six.
Point of order, Mayor.
Point of order, David Clendon.
Mr Speaker, we are exercising the extra supplementaries we received from the Honourable Mr Chris Carter.
Well, I'll allow the member to do that, but I ask, please, in the future to make sure the Speaker's advised of that, because I wasn't advised of that. And normally I am required to be advised of that, but I'll allow the member to ask his supplementary. David Clendon.
Apologies, Mr Speaker. Thank you for that. To the Minister, what resources or infrastructure does the New Zealand government have to deal with a catastrophic oil spill that was not available to the American government or BP Oil in the Gulf of Mexico?
The Honourable Hekia Parata.
Mr Speaker, I believe I answered the front end of that question in my last answer, and I have no responsibility for the US response.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, David Clendon.
Mr Speaker, I don't think the Minister addressed the question, let alone answered it, and I'd appreciate a more direct answer than that.
The question was actually not an unreasonable question. It asked what mechanisms or resources did the government have to deal with a oil spill that weren't available to the US. Now, it may be the minister just doesn't have that information because she certainly doesn't have any responsibility for the US, but it doesn't mean if the minister had any information on that, it's not an unreasonable question. But if the minister doesn't have any information on that, then it's perfectly reasonable to tell the House that she doesn't have specific information on that. The Honourable Heki-Patata.
Well, point of order, Mr Speaker. The response I gave to the previous question was that Maritime New Zealand is responsible for ensuring that New Zealand is well prepared and that the Marine Pollution Response Service consists of internationally respected experts who train a team of 400 local government and MNZ responders. But as to whether they were made available or not in terms of the US response, I cannot
order
answer.
The members now going further than necessary. The question, I believe I can't take the matter further because the minister, can't be expected to have that information. Yet I accept the member's question wasn't an unreasonable question, but whether or not a minister would have that specific information, and I don't think we should take further time of the House on that because the question specifically asked what extra facilities or resources do we have, and all the minister can outline is what we do have, and that may or may not be extra or not, but you can't expect the minister to necessarily know what the US has. Question number 9.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, David Clendon.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to table 2 documents. The first, a Ministry of Economic Development report of September 2010, comparative review of health, safety, environmental legislation, which states there is a lack of an environmental permitting regime in the exclusive economic zone.
Leave us sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is objection. David
Second document,
Clendon.
Mr Speaker. Seek leave to table the Environmental Defence Society submission on the MED offshore petroleum review, which provides evidence that the inspection office is severely under-resourced with only one part-time inspector.
Leave us sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is objection. Question number 9, the Honourable Trevor Mallett.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Rodney Hyde.
Mr Speaker, I ask you, Matt has just come up, and I ask you to reflect on this. Speaker Hunt started a new ruling in this House by allowing parties to shift the day in which they'd ask a question, or indeed to enable parties to shift questions from one party to another. We've just had the instance of apparently independent member Chris Carter not asking his question when it comes up, but rather transferring it to the Greens. And I'd ask you to reflect on whether that is allowed under the rules and indeed whether it should be allowed in the rules, because Chris Carter only gets a question once every blue moon, and if he can't be bothered coming to ask the question, he can actually postpone it to another day, and he was actually elected as a member of the Labor Party, not the Greens.
The members I'll hear the Honourable Trevor Mallett.
Mr Speaker, far be it for me to defend Chris Carter. I'd just like to remind Mr Hyde that his party has come to the Labor Party in order to request supplementaries to be transferred in that very way.
Order. I don't believe we need to... Order. We do not need to take this matter any further today. The Speaker, supplementaries are always at the discretion of the Speaker because there aren't rules over this matter. And what the Speaker did establish, as the Minister points out during Speaker Hunt's time, is that supplementary questions can be transferred provided the Speaker is advised. And today the Speaker was not advised. I re-emphasise the point. I allowed the supplementary to be transferred. We keep a track of how many questions are available to independent members so they cannot transfer more than they have available to them in the course of a week. And so we keep track of all of that, but the Speaker must be advised. In the future, I will not allow transfer of question unless I'm advised.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, Dr Russell Norman.
Mr Speaker, I'd just ask you to reflect that normally you've ruled that one shouldn't use the point of order process to cast aspersions on other members in the House or to make political points. Mr Hyde clearly said in reference to Mr Carter that he can't be bothered to turn up, which is clearly a negative connotation that he's put on Mr Carter. He's using the point of order process for a manner in which it was never designed for.
Order. I hear what the member said, and he will note that I did get to my feet and cut off the minister before he had completed his point of order for those very reasons. I felt he was starting to use the process to depart from the proper process for a point of order. If I was perhaps a little slow in getting to my feet, I do apologise for that. But
Point of order,
the Honourable Rodney.